Mother Bear stopped traffic outside the ER, baby in arms. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The rain hammered against the windshield of Nurse Kira Chen's Honda as she pulled into the hospital parking lot. Her 12-hour shift had ended 20 minutes ago, but the storm made driving treacherous. She sat in her car for a moment, watching the water cascade down the glass, when something caught her eye in the distance. A massive shape moved slowly along the edge of the forest that bordered Riverside General Hospital. At first, Kira thought it might be a large dog, but as lightning illuminated the sky, she realized it was much bigger, much more dangerous. A brown bear, a mother bear, and she was carrying something in her arms. Kira's breath caught in her throat as she watched the enormous animal step out of the tree line and onto the main road that led to the emergency room entrance. Cars were approaching from both directions, their headlights cutting through the darkness and rain. The bear stood directly in the middle of the road, completely blocking traffic. She didn't move when the first car screeched to a halt just 20 feet away. The driver laid on his horn, but the bear remained motionless, her massive head looking down at whatever she carried. More cars began to pile up behind the first one. Drivers rolled down their windows, shouting and cursing at what they assumed was just another wild animal causing problems. But Kira could see something they couldn't from her position in the parking lot. The bear wasn't just standing there randomly. She was facing the hospital, looking directly at the bright red emergency room sign that glowed through the rain. Kira grabbed her phone and called the hospital's main line. "This is Kira Chen. I'm in the parking lot, and there's a situation developing on the main road. A bear is blocking traffic right outside the ER." "A bear?" The voice on the other end sounded confused. "Are you sure?" "I'm positive. And she's carrying something. It looks like a cub, but I can't tell if it's—" Kira's voice trailed off as she watched the bear take another step toward the hospital entrance. The animal's movements were different from what Kira had seen in nature documentaries. There was something almost human about the way she carried herself. The way she seemed to be making a deliberate choice to stay exactly where she was, despite the chaos building around her. Traffic was backing up in both directions now. At least a dozen cars sat motionless on the rain-soaked road, their drivers growing increasingly agitated. Some had gotten out of their vehicles and were standing in the rain, pointing and taking pictures with their phones. "I need to get closer," Kira whispered to herself, ending the call. She had always been drawn to injured animals. As a child, she'd brought home every stray cat and wounded bird she found. Her mother used to joke that Kira had been born with a veterinarian's heart, but had chosen nursing instead. Now, watching this massive mother bear in what appeared to be distress, every instinct in Kira's body told her that something was terribly wrong. She opened her car door and stepped into the rain. The cold water immediately soaked through her scrubs, but she barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on the bear, who had now turned slightly toward the hospital entrance. That's when Kira saw it clearly for the first time. The small limp form in the bear's arms wasn't moving. The tiny cub's fur was matted with something dark that wasn't just rainwater. One of its small paws hung motionless, and its head lolled to one side in a way that made Kira's heart clench. The mother bear was holding her dying baby. As Kira moved closer, dodging between the stopped cars, she began to understand what she was witnessing. This wasn't a random encounter with a wild animal. This was a mother in desperate need of help, and somehow she had figured out that the building with the bright lights and the constant flow of people was a place where healing happened. The bear's eyes met Kira's across the distance, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. In those dark, intelligent eyes, Kira saw something that took her breath away. Recognition. The bear knew she was a healer. "Hey, get back in your car!" shouted a man from one of the stopped vehicles. That thing could charge at any second. But Kira kept walking, her nurse's training kicking in as she assessed the situation. The mother bear wasn't aggressive. Her body language spoke of exhaustion and desperation, not anger. Her powerful shoulders sagged with a weight that went far beyond the physical burden of carrying her cub. The rain continued to fall, creating small rivers that flowed toward the storm drains. The bear's massive paws shifted slightly on the wet asphalt, but she maintained her position directly in front of the emergency room entrance. More people were gathering now. Hospital security had been alerted, and Kira could see 2 guards approaching cautiously from the building. She also noticed Dr. Marcus Webb, the ER attending physician, standing just inside the glass doors, his phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling animal control. But there was something about this moment that felt too important to interrupt with protocol and procedures. The bear had made a choice to come here, to this place, at this time. And now she was waiting. Waiting for someone to understand what she needed. Kira took another step forward, her sneakers splashing through a puddle. The bear's ears twitched, and her massive head turned slightly in Kira's direction. For a heartbeat, the 2 mothers, one human, one wild, simply looked at each other through the rain. Then the bear did something that made several people in the crowd gasp audibly. She took a careful step toward Kira, adjusting her grip on the motionless cub, and made a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl. It was softer than that, almost like she was trying to communicate. Kira's heart pounded as she realized the bear was actually approaching her. Not with aggression, but with something that looked remarkably like hope. "Ma'am, please step back immediately." Security guard Jake Morrison called out from behind her, his hand hovering near the radio clipped to his belt. "Animal control is on their way." But Kira couldn't move. Something deeper than professional training was guiding her now. She had seen that same desperate look in the eyes of countless mothers who had carried their children into the emergency room. The universal language of a parent facing the unthinkable. The bear stopped just 10 feet away from Kira, close enough that she could see the individual droplets of rain clinging to the animal's thick fur. Close enough to see the way the mother's chest rose and fell with labored breathing. Close enough to see the tears. Yes, tears. They mixed with the rainwater on the bear's face, but Kira knew the difference. She had seen enough grief in her 8 years as an ER nurse to recognize it in any form. The cub in the bear's arms was barely breathing. Its tiny chest moved in irregular, shallow gasps that Kira recognized as signs of severe trauma. From her position, she could now see what appeared to be a wound on the cub's side, dark and wet with blood that the rain couldn't wash away. "Please," Kira whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the bear, to God, or to herself. "Let me help." The bear's ears perked up at the sound of Kira's voice. Slowly, deliberately, the massive animal lowered herself into a sitting position on the wet asphalt, still cradling her cub, but positioning herself in a way that seemed almost submissive. "What the hell is it doing?" someone from the crowd shouted. Dr. Webb emerged from the hospital entrance, his white coat already soaked from the few steps he'd taken outside. "Kira, get away from there right now. This situation is extremely dangerous." But something extraordinary was happening, and Kira could feel it in every fiber of her being. The bear wasn't just sitting randomly. She was presenting her cub. The same way human mothers rushed into the ER and thrust their injured children toward the first medical professional they saw. Dr. Webb, Kira called over her shoulder, never taking her eyes off the bear. "I think she's trying to ask for help." "Bears don't ask for help, Kira. They're wild animals driven by instinct and—" His words were cut off by a sound that made everyone in the area fall silent. The bear was making a noise unlike anything Kira had ever heard. It was low and mournful, almost like a lament. It was the sound of a mother's heart breaking. The cub in her arms let out a weak whimper, so faint that only Kira, standing closest, could hear it. The tiny sound seemed to galvanize the mother bear. She looked directly at Kira and made that same rumbling vocalization, but this time it sounded different, more urgent, more pleading. "She's trying to communicate," Kira breathed, taking a small step forward. "Kira, no." Dr. Webb's voice was sharp with authority, but something in the bear's eyes made Kira ignore every protocol she'd ever learned. She took another step, then another, until she was close enough to see the individual scars on the bear's muzzle. Old wounds that spoke of a hard life in the wild. But there was intelligence in those dark eyes. Ancient wisdom mixed with modern desperation. The rain was coming down harder now, creating a curtain of water that seemed to separate this moment from the rest of the world. The crowd of onlookers, the stopped traffic, the shouting voices, all of it faded into background noise as Kira found herself in what felt like a sacred space with this grieving mother. "I understand," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You know this is where we help the hurt ones. You know this is where we try to save lives." The bear's response was immediate. She gently, carefully began to lower the cub toward the ground. Her movements were so deliberate, so controlled, that it was impossible to mistake them for anything other than an offering, a plea. But as the cub was lowered, Kira could see the full extent of its injuries for the first time. What she had initially thought was a single wound was actually multiple trauma sites. Deep puncture marks that looked disturbingly uniform. Too uniform to be from another animal's claws or teeth. Her blood ran cold as the realization hit her. "Oh my God," she gasped, loud enough for Dr. Webb to hear. "What is it?" he called, taking a step closer despite his own warnings. "These aren't animal attack wounds," Kira said, her voice hollow with horror. "Dr. Webb, this cub has been shot multiple times." The words seemed to electrify everyone within hearing distance. The random chatter from the crowd stopped abruptly, replaced by gasps of shock and murmurs of disbelief. The mother bear, as if understanding that her cub's condition had been recognized, made that mournful sound again. But this time, Kira heard something else in it. Something that made her chest tight with emotion. Gratitude. The bear was grateful that someone finally understood. Dr. Webb was now moving closer, his medical instincts overriding his caution. "Are you certain those are gunshot wounds?" Kira nodded, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. "I've seen enough of them to know. Someone shot this baby, multiple times." Her voice cracked with anger and sorrow. "And somehow, the mother knew to bring it here." The bear remained perfectly still as Dr. Webb approached, allowing him to get close enough to see what Kira had discovered. His face went pale as he took in the small, still form. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "What kind of person shoots a bear cub?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Officer Dana Rodriguez had arrived with the first responders, and she had been listening to the conversation while maintaining a safe distance. "Poachers," she said grimly. "We've had reports of illegal hunting in the state forest. Bears are protected, but that doesn't stop some people." The word poachers seemed to ripple through the crowd like a shockwave. The mood shifted dramatically as people realized they weren't just witnessing a random wildlife encounter. They were seeing the aftermath of a crime. a crime that had driven a desperate mother to seek help in the most unlikely place. The cub let out another weak sound, so faint it was almost lost in the rain. But the mother bear heard it and responded with a series of soft grunts and rumbles, as if she were trying to comfort her baby with words only they could understand. Kira felt her heart breaking as she watched this display of maternal love playing out in front of her. Without thinking, she knelt down in the puddle that had formed around them, bringing herself to the bear's eye level. "I want to help," she said, speaking directly to the animal as if she were talking to any concerned parent. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" The bear's response was unlike anything anyone present had ever witnessed from a wild animal. She carefully, gently, pushed the cub forward with her massive paw, moving it closer to Kira. Then she sat back, watching with eyes that held both hope and terror. She was entrusting her most precious possession to a human stranger. Dr. Webb was already on his radio, calling for a veterinary emergency kit to be brought from the hospital. "I don't care what the regulations say," he barked at whoever was on the other end. "This is a medical emergency, and I'm treating it as such." Kira reached out slowly, telegraphing her movements so the mother bear could see exactly what she was doing. Her hands were shaking as they made contact with the cub's wet fur. The little body was so still, so fragile. She could barely feel a pulse. "We need to move fast," she told Dr. Webb. "This baby is in shock, and from what I can see, at least one of the bullets is still inside." The mother bear watched every movement Kira made, her massive head tilting slightly as if she were trying to understand the medical assessment. When Kira began to lift the cub, the bear made a low sound that wasn't quite a growl, but wasn't friendly either. "It's okay," Kira said softly, meeting the bear's eyes. "I'm just taking him inside where we can help him better. You can watch. You can stay right here and watch everything we do." As if she understood every word, the bear rose to her feet and followed as Kira began walking toward the hospital entrance, carrying the injured cub. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, everyone staring in amazement at the unprecedented sight of a wild bear calmly following a nurse into a human medical facility. But just as they reached the automatic doors, something happened that changed everything. A loud crack echoed across the parking lot, followed immediately by the distinctive whistle of a bullet passing close overhead. The sound was unmistakable to anyone who had heard it before. The mother bear let out a roar that seemed to shake the very ground, spinning around to face the tree line where the shot had come from. Her massive body tensed, every muscle coiled and ready for battle. Someone was out there in the darkness. Someone with a gun. And they weren't finished hunting. "Everyone get inside now," Officer Rodriguez shouted, drawing her weapon as she scanned the tree line. "Active shooter situation." The crowd that had been mesmerized by the bear's behavior suddenly erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran toward the hospital entrance, pushing and stumbling over each other in their panic. Car doors slammed as drivers abandoned their vehicles and sought shelter. But the mother bear didn't run. Instead, she positioned herself between the tree line and Kira, who was still holding the injured cub. The massive animal's lips pulled back to reveal teeth that could crush bone, and she let out a roar that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "Kira, get that cub inside immediately," Dr. Webb commanded, but his voice was barely audible over the mother bear's continued roaring. Another shot rang out, this one striking the pavement just feet from where they stood. Sparks flew as the bullet ricocheted off the asphalt, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the rain-soaked air. The mother bear's rage was unlike anything Kira had ever witnessed. This wasn't just animal aggression. This was the fury of a mother whose child had been hurt, and who now faced the same threat again. She charged toward the tree line, her massive form disappearing into the darkness between the trees. "No, wait," Kira called after her. But the bear was already gone, leaving only the sound of crashing underbrush in her wake. Dr. Webb grabbed Kira's arm. "We need to get inside now. That cub needs immediate medical attention, and we can't help anyone if we're dead." They rushed through the automatic doors, the injured cub still cradled in Kira's arms. The normally busy ER had been transformed into something resembling a war zone. Patients and staff had taken cover behind desks and medical equipment, while security guards coordinated with the police officers who had arrived on scene. "Trauma Bay 2, Dr. Webb directed, leading Kira through the maze of frightened people. "We'll treat this as we would any gunshot victim." As they entered the trauma bay, Kira carefully placed the cub on the examination table. Under the bright hospital lights, the extent of the injuries was even more heartbreaking. The small animal's breathing was labored and irregular, and the gunshot wounds were clearly visible through the matted fur. "This is unbelievable," whispered Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinarian who had been called in from the animal clinic across town. She had arrived just as the shooting started and had taken shelter in the hospital. "I've never seen wounds like this on such a young animal." Dr. Webb was already preparing an IV line, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the unprecedented nature of their patient. "Age of the cub? Maybe 3 months," Dr. Chen replied, her voice tight with emotion. "Old enough to be following Mom around, but still completely dependent on her for survival." Outside, they could hear more gunshots, followed by the sound of the mother bear's roars echoing through the forest. The sounds of battle were getting closer to the hospital. "Why would someone do this?" Kira asked, gently stroking the cub's fur as Dr. Chen began cleaning the wounds. "What's the point of shooting a baby?" Officer Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, her radio crackling with updates from other units. "We think we know who's responsible," she said grimly. "There's been a man living in the woods illegally for the past few months. Local hunters have reported seeing him setting illegal traps and shooting at wildlife. Name's Vernon Grimm." The name sent a chill down Kira's spine. There was something inherently sinister about it, like something out of a dark fairy tale. "He's been evading us for weeks," Rodriguez continued, "but this is the first time he's fired shots near populated areas. We think the mother bear might have been protecting her cub from his traps when he shot it." Dr. Chen had managed to locate one of the bullets lodged in the cub's shoulder. "This is a small caliber round," she observed, "probably from a .22 rifle. He wasn't trying to kill it quickly. These wounds are meant to cause suffering." The revelation made Kira's stomach turn. The idea that someone would deliberately torture a helpless animal was almost incomprehensible to her. But it explained why the mother bear had been so desperate to get help. She had watched her baby suffer for hours, maybe days, before finally deciding to seek human assistance. How did she know to come here? Dr. Webb wondered aloud as he worked to stabilize the cub's vital signs. How did a wild bear figure out that a hospital was a place for healing? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the hospital's chief administrator, had been watching the proceedings from the doorway. "I think I might know," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "About 6 months ago, we had a situation in the parking lot. A deer had been hit by a car and was badly injured. The local wildlife rescue team brought it here because their facility was full. We treated it in the old storage building behind the main hospital." Dr. Vasquez paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "The deer recovered and was released back into the wild about a month later. The rescue team said they'd never seen anything like it. The deer actually came back to the hospital grounds several times after its release, just hanging around the parking lot like it was visiting." You think other animals in the area learned that this was a place where injured animals got better? Kira asked. It's possible. Animals are much more intelligent than we give them credit for. They communicate with each other, share information about food sources, safe places, danger zones. Dr. Vasquez gestured toward the cub on the table. Maybe word spread through the local wildlife population that this building was a place of healing. The idea was both beautiful and heartbreaking. It meant that somewhere in the forest, animals were telling each other stories about the place where humans helped the hurt ones get better. And in her darkest moment, the mother bear had remembered those stories and made the desperate journey to seek help for her baby. Another series of gunshots echoed from outside, followed by what sounded like splintering wood. The sounds were getting closer. He's moving toward the hospital, Officer Rodriguez reported after listening to her radio. My backup units are trying to track him, but he knows these woods better than we do. Dr. Chen had successfully removed 2 bullets from the cub and was working on the 3rd. This little guy is tougher than he looks, she murmured. His vital signs are actually improving. As if responding to her words, the cub's eyes fluttered open for the first time since Kira had seen him. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with a kind of ancient wisdom that seemed impossible in such a young creature. Hey there, little one, Kira whispered, gently touching his tiny paw. You're safe now. We're going to take good care of you. The cub made a soft sound, barely audible but unmistakably a response to her voice. It was a sound of trust, of gratitude, of hope. But their moment of triumph was shattered by a new sound from outside. It wasn't gunshots this time. It was the mother bear, and she was screaming. Not roaring, screaming. The sound was unlike anything any of them had ever heard from an animal. It was pure agony, the cry of a creature in mortal pain. Oh, God, Kira breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. He's hurt her. Officer Rodriguez was already moving toward the door. I'm going out there. No, wait, Dr. Webb called after her. It could be a trap. He might be trying to draw us outside. But Rodriguez was already gone, disappearing into the hallway with her weapon drawn. The screaming continued for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the screaming had been. We have to do something, Kira said, looking around the room at the faces of her colleagues. We can't just stand here while she's out there hurt. Kira, you're not trained for this kind of situation, Dr. Webb reminded her. Leave it to the police. But Kira was already moving toward a supply cabinet, grabbing medical supplies and stuffing them into a portable trauma kit. That bear trusted me with her baby, she said fiercely. She put her child's life in my hands because she believed I would help. I'm not going to abandon her now. Dr. Chen looked up from her work on the cub. The little one is stable for now. The bullets are out, and I've got him on pain medication and antibiotics. If you're really going out there, you have maybe 30 minutes before he'll need more intensive care. Kira nodded, slinging the trauma kit over her shoulder. Then, I better hurry. You're not going alone, Doctor. Webb said, surprising everyone. I took an oath to help the sick and injured, regardless of species. That bear is a patient now, whether she knows it or not. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. I'm calling for more backup. Every unit in the county if necessary. This man has turned our hospital into a battleground, and I won't stand for it. As they prepared to leave the safety of the trauma bay, the light suddenly went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. He's cut the main power line. Officer Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. All units be advised, suspect is now inside the hospital perimeter. Repeat, suspect is inside the perimeter. In the distance, they could hear the sound of breaking glass. Vernon Grimm had come to finish what he started, and he was inside the building. The emergency lighting cast long, twisted shadows down the hospital corridors, turning familiar spaces into something from a nightmare. Kira clutched the trauma kit tighter as she and Dr. Webb moved cautiously toward the main entrance, following the sound of breaking glass and scattered voices of hospital staff trying to coordinate in the chaos. "Stay behind me, Doctor," Webb whispered, though neither of them had any real training for this kind of situation. They were healers, not warriors. The automatic doors had been shattered, glass fragments crunching under their feet as they stepped into what remained of the main lobby. The reception desk was overturned, and several of the waiting room chairs had been thrown across the space. But what made Kira's blood run cold was the trail of dark spots leading from the entrance toward the emergency department. Blood. And it was too much to be human. "The bear," Kira breathed. "She's bleeding badly." Dr. Webb knelt down and touched one of the spots with his finger. "This is fresh. Maybe 5 minutes old." He looked up at Kira with grim concern. She's somewhere in this building, probably following her instincts to find her cub. A loud crash echoed from the direction of the cafeteria, followed by a man's voice shouting obscenities. The voice was rough and slurred, like someone who had been drinking or was high on something that made him reckless and violent. "That's him, Doctor," Webb said. Grimm. They followed the blood trail down the main corridor, past the pharmacy and the imaging department. The emergency lighting flickered intermittently, creating a strobe effect that made everything feel surreal and disorienting. As they approached the cafeteria, they could hear furniture being thrown around and the sound of someone ransacking the place. But underneath those sounds was something else, a low, pained whimpering that made Kira's heart clench. "She's in there," Kira whispered, "and she's hurt." Dr. Webb checked his phone. Still no signal. The power outage must have taken out the cell towers, too. He looked at Kira seriously. "We're on our own until backup can locate us." They peered around the corner into the cafeteria, and what they saw made both of them gasp. The mother bear was there, but she was trapped. Vernon Grimm had somehow managed to corner her near the kitchen area, using overturned tables to create a makeshift barrier. The bear was sitting against the wall, favoring her left side where dark blood matted her fur. Grimm himself was exactly what Kira had imagined. A thin, wild-looking man in his 50s with long, greasy hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in months. He held a rifle in his hands, but instead of pointing it at the bear, he seemed to be taunting her, staying just out of reach while making loud noises and gestures. "Thought you could get away from me, didn't you?" Grimm was saying, his words slurred and erratic. "Thought you could bring your little baby to the fancy human doctors and everything would be fine?" He laughed, a sound that had no humor in it. "Well, guess what? I ain't done with either of you yet." The bear's eyes were fixed on Grimm, but Kira could see that the animal was weakening. The blood loss from whatever wound she had sustained was taking its toll. Her massive head swayed slightly and her breathing was labored. "I've been watching you for weeks," Grimm continued, apparently enjoying having a captive audience, even if it was a wounded bear. "You and your little family, thinking you own these woods? Well, these are my woods now. I live here, I hunt here, and anything that lives here is mine to do with as I please." Kira felt a surge of pure rage at his words. This man wasn't just a poacher. He was a sadist who enjoyed causing pain to helpless creatures. "We need to create a distraction," she whispered to Dr. Webb. "Something to draw him away from her so we can get close enough to assess her injuries." But before Dr. Webb could respond, they heard new sounds from behind them. Footsteps in the corridor, moving fast and with purpose. Officer Rodriguez appeared at their side, breathing hard and with her weapon drawn. "There you are," she whispered. "I've been trying to find you. My backup is still 10 minutes out, but I couldn't wait any longer." She looked into the cafeteria and took in the scene. Jesus, he's completely lost it. "The bear is badly injured," Dr. Webb reported quietly. "We need to get her medical attention, but as long as he's armed and unstable, we can't get close." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I'm going to try to talk him down. If that doesn't work—" She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. She stepped into the doorway of the cafeteria, her weapon trained on Grimm but held low in a non-threatening position. "Vernon Grimm," she called out in a calm, authoritative voice. "This is Officer Rodriguez with the county police. I need you to put down your weapon and step away from the animal." Grimm spun around, his eyes wild and unfocused. When he saw the police officer, his face twisted into a snarl. "There's always someone trying to tell me what I can and can't do," he spat. "First it was my ex-wife, then the landlord, then the government telling me I can't hunt where I want to hunt. Well, I'm done taking orders from people." "Vernon, nobody wants to hurt you," Rodriguez continued, taking a small step into the room. "But that bear needs medical attention and you're preventing us from helping her. Just put the rifle down and we can talk about this." Grimm's response was to raise his weapon, but instead of pointing it at Officer Rodriguez, he aimed it directly at the injured bear. "You want me to put it down? Fine. But first, I'm going to finish what I started." The bear seemed to understand the threat. Despite her injuries, she struggled to get to her feet, her maternal instincts still driving her to fight for survival. She needed to get back to her cub. "No!" Kira shouted, stepping into the cafeteria before anyone could stop her. "Don't you dare!" Grimm's attention shifted to her, his finger still on the trigger, but the rifle now pointed in her direction. Well, the bear whisperer herself. "You're the one who took my prize, aren't you?" "Your prize?" Kira's voice was shaking with anger. "That's a baby. A helpless baby that you shot for no reason other than your own sick pleasure." "Everything in these woods belongs to me," Grimm repeated, his voice rising to a shout. "That includes every bear, every deer, every squirrel, and every tree. I don't need permission from anyone to do what I want with my own property." Dr. Webb had moved to a position where he could see the bear more clearly, and what he observed made him forget all about the dangerous man with the rifle. "Kira," he called urgently, "the bear isn't just injured from a gunshot, she's pregnant." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Everyone, including Grimm, turned to stare at Dr. Webb. "What did you say?" Rodriguez asked. "She's heavily pregnant," Dr. Webb repeated, his medical training allowing him to recognize the signs even in a bear. "Probably due to give birth within the next few weeks. That's why she's been so desperate to protect the cub we're treating. It's not just her only baby, it's her only surviving baby." The implications of this revelation crashed over Kira like a wave. The mother bear hadn't just been protecting one cub from this monster. She had been protecting her entire family. And now, wounded and trapped, she was fighting not just for her own life, but for the lives of the unborn cubs she carried. Grimm's face had gone pale at Dr. Webb's announcement, but instead of showing remorse, his expression hardened with renewed determination. "Even better," he said coldly. "I can wipe out the whole bloodline at once." It was then that Kira noticed something that changed everything. The blood trail they had followed from the entrance didn't end with the bear. There were smaller droplets leading away from where she sat, toward a service corridor that led to the kitchen storage areas. The injured cub had somehow gotten out of the trauma bay, and he was somewhere in the building, looking for his mother. Before anyone could react to this new development, a small, weak sound echoed through the cafeteria. It was the unmistakable cry of a bear cub in distress. The mother bear's response was immediate and heartbreaking. Despite her injuries, despite being cornered by an armed man, despite being pregnant and exhausted, she let out a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It was the sound of a mother calling to her baby, telling him she was there, that she would protect him no matter what. And from somewhere in the darkness of the storage area, the cub answered back. Grim's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes lighting up with malicious glee. Well, now, looks like the family reunion is about to get even more interesting. He started moving toward the storage area, his rifle ready, and Kira realized with horror that he intended to hunt down the injured cub in the darkness of the kitchen storage rooms. The mother bear realized it too. With a surge of strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her physical limitations, she broke free from the makeshift barrier that had been containing her. Tables went flying as 400 pounds of desperate maternal fury charged across the cafeteria. But she wasn't charging at Grim. She was charging toward the storage area, toward her baby, putting herself between the armed man and her cub, even though it meant exposing herself to point-blank gunfire. Officer Rodriguez raised her weapon, but she couldn't get a clear shot with the bear moving so fast and Kira still in the line of fire. Everything was happening too fast, and Kira knew that in the next few seconds, either the mother bear or her cub, or both, were going to die, unless she did something to stop it. Without thinking, without planning, without any regard for her own safety, Kira threw herself forward, directly into Grim's path. Her trauma kit flew open as she tackled him, medical supplies scattering across the floor as both of them went down hard on the linoleum. The rifle went off as they fell, the shot going wide and shattering a window near the ceiling. But Grim was stronger than he looked, and the tackle had only delayed him, not stopped him. As they struggled on the floor, Kira could hear the mother bear crashing through the storage area, following the sound of her cub's cries. She could hear Officer Rodriguez shouting orders into her radio, calling for immediate backup and medical assistance. But mostly, she could hear Grim's ragged breathing in her ear as he tried to push her off him, his hands reaching for the rifle that had skittered away across the floor. "You stupid woman," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've interfered with. This is bigger than just some bears in the woods." As they grappled, something fell out of Grim's jacket pocket. A small digital camera, the kind used by wildlife photographers. But when Kira glimpsed the preview screen as it tumbled across the floor, what she saw made her blood freeze. The images weren't of wildlife photography. They were photographs of bear cubs, dozens of them, all dead, all arranged in poses that spoke of torture rather than hunting. Vernon Grimm wasn't just a poacher. He was a serial killer whose victims happened to be animals. The camera's screen flickered with image after image of horror. Bear cubs strung up like trophies, arranged in grotesque poses, their eyes still reflecting the terror they had experienced in their final moments. Some of the photos were time-stamped, showing that Grimm's killing spree had been going on for over 2 years. "You sick bastard," Kira gasped, her grip on him tightening despite the revulsion coursing through her. Grimm's laugh was cold and hollow. "You think this is about the animals? You naive little nurse. This is about much more than that." He managed to get one arm free and backhanded Kira across the face, sending her sprawling across the floor. Officer Rodriguez moved in quickly, her weapon trained on Grim as he scrambled toward his rifle. "Freeze. Do not move another inch." But Grim was beyond reason now. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," he snarled at all of them. "The bears are just the beginning. There are people who pay very good money for certain photographs, and they're not the kind of people you want to cross. The words hit Kira like a physical blow. This wasn't just about one deranged man torturing animals for his own sick pleasure. This was about a network of people who paid for images of animal suffering, an entire underground market for cruelty. From the storage area, they could hear the sounds of the mother bear reuniting with her cub, low, rumbling vocalizations that spoke of relief and comfort despite the dangerous circumstances. But those sounds were getting weaker, which meant the mother bear's condition was deteriorating rapidly. "Dr. Webb," Kira called out, struggling to get back to her feet. "We need to get to them now. She's losing too much blood." But Grim had reached his rifle. Instead of pointing it at the humans, however, he aimed it toward the storage area where the bear family was hidden. "They're not going anywhere," he said with malicious satisfaction. "And neither are you." That's when they heard the voices from outside. Multiple vehicles had arrived in the parking lot, and the sounds of organized law enforcement were getting closer to the building. "Backup's here," Rodriguez said with obvious relief. "Grim, you're outnumbered now. Surrender your weapon, and nobody else has to get hurt." But Grim's response was to pull out a second weapon, a handgun that had been concealed in his waistband. "I told you, this is bigger than you understand. You think a few local cops are going to stop what's been in motion for years." He pressed a button on a small device clipped to his belt, and somewhere in the building, they heard the sound of an explosion. The lights went out completely this time, not even emergency power remaining. "What did you do?" Dr. Webb demanded. "Insurance," Grim replied. "This building has structural damage now. Even if you try to leave with those bears, you won't make it far." In the darkness, Kira could hear the sounds of the mother bear moving again, but her movements were slower, more labored. The combination of blood loss, stress, and her advanced pregnancy was taking a toll that even her fierce maternal instincts couldn't overcome. "There's something else you should know." Grim's voice came through the darkness, and there was something different about his tone now, something that sounded almost triumphant. "The little cub you've been treating? He wasn't the only one I shot that day." Kira's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean there was another cub, a sister, and she's still out there in the woods, probably dying slowly from the wounds I gave her." Grim's laugh echoed through the dark cafeteria. "Even if you save this family, there's still one more suffering because of me." The cruelty of it was beyond comprehension. Not only had he tortured one family of bears, but he had separated siblings, leaving one to die alone in the forest while forcing the mother to choose which child to try to save. "You're lying, Doctor," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Check the camera. Image 247, taken 3 days ago." Against her better judgment, Kira felt around on the floor until she found the digital camera. The screen provided the only light in the room as she scrolled through the horrific images until she reached the one Grim had referenced. What she saw made her stomach turn. A second bear cub, smaller than the one they had been treating, lying motionless in a pile of leaves. But the timestamp showed it had been taken after the shooting, and there was still a faint rise and fall to the small chest in the photo. "She was still alive when I took that picture," Grim said with obvious satisfaction. "Probably still is, if she's tough like her brother, but she won't last much longer without medical attention." The psychological torture was almost worse than the physical violence. Grim had found a way to torment the mother bear even beyond her immediate circumstances. Even if they saved her and the cub they had, there would always be the knowledge that another baby was out there, dying alone. Suddenly, the darkness was pierced by powerful flashlight beams as the backup officers made their way into the building. "Police! Everyone identify yourselves." Officer Rodriguez here, Rodriguez called out. I have 3 civilians and 1 armed suspect in the cafeteria. Suspect is holding multiple weapons and has made threats. But as the officers moved closer, Grimm made his final, desperate play. Instead of surrendering or trying to fight the police, he aimed both weapons toward the storage area where the Bear family was hiding. If I can't finish this properly, then nobody gets a happy ending, he snarled. The mother bear must have sensed the renewed danger. From the storage area came a sound that none of them had heard before. Not a roar of anger or a cry of pain, but something that sounded almost like singing. A low, melodic vocalization that seemed to be directed at her cub. Dr. Webb grabbed Kira's arm. She's singing to him, he whispered in amazement. She's comforting him because she thinks they're about to die. The beauty of that moment. A mother's love expressing itself, even in the face of death, seemed to affect everyone in the room, even some of the hardened police officers who had just arrived. Everyone except Vernon Grimm. How touching, he sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. A lullaby for the dead. But before he could fire, something extraordinary happened. The injured cub, despite his wounds and weakness, managed to crawl out of the storage area toward the sound of his mother's voice. In the beam of the police flashlights, everyone could see the small, bloodied form dragging itself across the floor, determined to reach his mother's side. The sight was so heartbreaking, so pure in its demonstration of familial love that it seemed to freeze everyone in place. Even the police officers lowered their weapons slightly, momentarily stunned by what they were witnessing. Grimm raised his rifle toward the approaching cub, but his hands were shaking now. Whether from drugs, alcohol, or the psychological pressure of the situation, his aim was unsteady. "Don't do it, Vernon," Officer Rodriguez said quietly. "Whatever happened to you to make you this way, this isn't the answer. That's just a baby trying to get to his mother." For a moment, Grimm's finger hesitated on the trigger. In the flashlight beams, Kira could see something flicker across his face. Something that might have been doubt or regret, or the ghost of whatever humanity he had possessed before becoming a monster. But then his expression hardened again. "You want to know what made me this way?" he asked, his voice raw with years of accumulated bitterness. "I'll tell you what made me this way. 23 years ago, I was a wildlife photographer, a real one. I loved animals, spent my whole life documenting their beauty and their behavior." He kept the rifle aimed at the cub, but he was talking now, and as long as he was talking, he wasn't shooting. "I was in these same woods, photographing a bear family. Mother and 2 cubs, just like this one. I spent weeks earning their trust, documenting their daily lives, their interactions. It was going to be my masterpiece, the photographs that would make my career." The cub had reached his mother now, and she wrapped her massive paw around him, pulling him close to her body while continuing that soft, singing vocalization. But some rich businessman from the city decided he wanted to go hunting. Private land, private guides, guaranteed kill. They came into my territory and shot the mother bear I'd been photographing. Shot her right in front of her cubs. Grimm's voice was getting more emotional, more unstable. "I tried to save the babies, spent 3 days trying to keep them alive, feeding them by hand, keeping them warm, but they died anyway, both of them. Died crying for their mother." Kira could see where this was going, and it made her sick. "So, you decided to make other bears suffer because you couldn't save those cubs." "I decided that if I couldn't create beauty in this world, then I would create its opposite," Grimm said. "If I couldn't document love and family and all those pretty things that people like to pretend matter, then I would document the truth. That this world is cruel, and suffering is the only constant, and love just makes the pain worse when it's taken away. The mother bear had stopped singing and was now watching Grim with eyes that seemed to understand every word he was saying. Her paw tightened protectively around her cub, and despite her injuries, she managed to position herself between her baby and the rifle. "She knows," Dr. Webb observed quietly. "She knows he's talking about other bears, other families like hers." Officer Rodriguez was slowly moving closer, trying to get into position for a clear shot if necessary. "Vernon, those cubs you tried to save 23 years ago, they wouldn't want this. They wouldn't want you to hurt other families the way yours was hurt." "You don't know what they'd want," Grim snapped. "You didn't watch them die. You didn't feel them stop breathing in your hands." But something in his voice had changed. The absolute certainty was wavering, replaced by something that sounded almost like grief. The cub, still weak but determined, managed to lift his small head and look directly at Grim. In the flashlight beams, his dark eyes reflected a kind of innocent trust that had survived despite everything he had endured. It was then that Kira realized something that changed everything. "The photographs," she said suddenly. "Dr. Webb, look at the photographs in that camera again." Dr. Webb picked up the digital camera and began scrolling through the images more carefully. "What am I looking for?" "The timestamps. Look at the timestamps on the torture photos versus the ones of the cubs he says he tried to save." Dr. Webb's face went pale as he compared the dates. "Kira, these torture photos, they start exactly 23 years ago, the same time he claims he was trying to save those orphaned cubs." The implication hit everyone in the room like a thunderbolt. Vernon Grim hadn't started torturing animals because he failed to save 2 bear cubs. He had been torturing animals all along, including those cubs. The story about being a wildlife photographer, about trying to save them, about becoming bitter after they died, it was all a lie. "You never tried to save them at all," Kira said, her voice filled with disgust. "You killed them. You killed those cubs yourself, just like you've been killing animals for over 20 years. Grim's facade finally cracked completely. The pretense of being a tragic figure driven to madness by loss disappeared, replaced by something much more honest and infinitely more frightening. "So, what if I did?" he snarled. "They were going to die anyway. Everything dies. I just made it more artistic." But his moment of honesty had cost him his psychological advantage. The police officers who had been hesitating because of his tale of tragedy now understood exactly what they were dealing with. "Take the shot," Rodriguez commanded into her radio. But before any of the officers could act, the mother bear made her own decision. Despite her wounds, despite her pregnancy, despite the rifle pointed at her family, she rose to her full height and let out a roar that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. It wasn't a sound of pain or fear. It was a sound of absolute, uncompromising defiance, a declaration that she would not allow this creature to harm her children, no matter what it cost her. The power of that roar, the sheer force of maternal determination behind it, seemed to physically stagger Grim. He stumbled backward, his aim wavering as 400 pounds of protective fury bore down on him. And in that moment of distraction, Officer Rodriguez took her shot. The gunshot echoed through the cafeteria, followed immediately by the sound of Grim's rifle clattering to the floor. He collapsed beside it, clutching his shoulder and cursing. But the mother bear didn't stop. Even with the threat neutralized, she continued moving toward Grim, her massive form radiating menace. She had heard his confession, had understood that he was the source of her family's suffering, and her instincts demanded justice. "Wait!" Kira called out, stepping between the bear and the wounded man. "Wait, please, he's done. He can't hurt you anymore." The bear stopped just feet away from Grim, her massive head tilting as she looked at Kira. For a moment, the two mothers looked at each other across the species divide, and Kira saw something in the bear's eyes that took her breath away. Forgiveness. Not for Grim, but for Kira. The bear was giving her the choice of what happened next. "He'll face justice," Kira promised, "human justice. And we'll find the other cub, the sister. We'll bring her back and heal her too." The bear seemed to consider this. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned away from Grim and moved back toward her injured cub. The immediate threat was over, but her baby still needed care. As the police officers moved in to secure Grim and provide medical attention for his gunshot wound, Dr. Webb was already preparing to help the bear family. "We need to get all three of them to proper medical facilities immediately," he said. "The mother has lost a lot of blood, the cub needs continued care, and if she really is pregnant, those unborn babies are at risk from all the stress and trauma." But as they began organizing the medical response, Kira's phone suddenly buzzed with an incoming text message. The cell towers must have come back online when backup power was restored to the building. The message was from an unknown number, and when she opened it, her blood ran cold. Grim was just the beginning. The network he worked for is much larger than you can imagine. If you think saving these bears means anything in the bigger picture, you're sadly mistaken. We have been watching this hospital, and we know exactly who you are now. Dr. Kira Chen, 1247 Maple Street, Apartment 3B, will be in touch soon. The message was accompanied by a photograph that made Kira's hands shake. It was a picture of her own apartment building, taken from across the street, and in the window of her third-floor apartment, clearly visible, was her cat Whiskers sitting on the windowsill. They knew where she lived. They had been watching her, and they wanted her to know it. The fight to save this bear family had been just the beginning. Now, Kira had inadvertently declared war on an entire network of people who made their living from animal suffering. And they were coming for her. But as Kira stared at the threatening message, something unexpected happened. The mother bear, still bleeding and exhausted, slowly approached her. With infinite gentleness, the massive animal reached out with one enormous paw and touched Kira's arm. Not to harm, but to comfort. In that moment, Kira understood something profound. This bear, who had every reason to fear and distrust humans after what Grim had done to her family, was offering support to the woman who had risked everything to help them. The bear somehow sensed Kira's fear and was trying to give her strength. "We're in this together now, aren't we?" Kira whispered, looking into those intelligent brown eyes. The bear made a soft rumbling sound that seemed to say yes. Dr. Webb finished securing an IV line for the mother bear, while Officer Rodriguez coordinated with the wildlife rescue team that had just arrived. "The third cub," Rodriguez reported after ending a radio call. "Search teams found her about half a mile into the forest. She's alive, but barely. They're bringing her in now." 20 minutes later, Kira watched through the hospital windows as the rescue team carried in a small, still form wrapped in blankets. The sister cub was even smaller than her brother, and her injuries were severe. But she was breathing. The reunion that followed was something that would stay with everyone present for the rest of their lives. When the mother bear saw her daughter being brought into the trauma bay, she made a sound that was pure joy mixed with relief. The injured cub responded with a weak but unmistakable cry of recognition. Dr. Chen worked frantically to stabilize the sister while Dr. Webb continued treating the mother bear's gunshot wound. The brother cub, despite his own injuries, managed to crawl closer to his sister and touch her with his tiny paw. "They're going to make it," Dr. Chen announced after what felt like hours of work. All three of them. The mother will need weeks of recovery, and the cubs will need intensive care, but they're going to survive. As dawn broke over the hospital, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Kira stood in the parking lot, watching as the Bear family was loaded into a specialized wildlife transport vehicle. The mother bear looked back at her one last time before the doors closed, and Kira could swear she saw gratitude in those dark eyes. "What about the network?" Dr. Webb asked, joining her outside. "What about the threats?" Kira looked down at her phone, where the threatening message still glowed on the screen. Then, deliberately, she deleted it and tucked the phone away. "Let them come," she said simply. "Tonight I learned something important. When mothers stand together, whether they're human or bear or anything else, there's no force on earth that can defeat them." Officer Rodriguez approached with an update. "We found Grimm's campsite in the woods, computers, cameras, evidence of the network he was talking about. FBI is taking over the investigation now. This thing goes interstate, maybe international." "Good," Kira replied. "They're going to find out what happens when you threaten a family." 6 months later, Kira received a letter from the wildlife sanctuary where the Bear family had been relocated. Enclosed were photographs that made her cry with happiness. The mother bear had given birth to 2 healthy cubs, and the family of 5 was thriving in their new, protected home. But the most precious gift was the final photograph in the envelope. It showed the mother bear standing on her hind legs at the edge of a meadow, her 4 cubs playing safely nearby. She was looking directly at the camera, and somehow Kira knew the bear was thinking of her. In the corner of the photo, someone had written a simple message. "Some bonds transcend species. Some love conquers all. Thank you for believing in the power of a mother's heart." The network that had threatened Kira was dismantled within a year, their operations shut down by an international task force that had been hunting them for years. Grimm's testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, provided the evidence needed to bring down dozens of people involved in the animal torture trade. Kira never saw the Bear family again in person, but she didn't need to. She carried them with her always. The memory of a mother's love so fierce it could stop traffic, change hearts, and remind the world that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with compassion. And late at night, when the rain fell against her apartment windows, Kira would sometimes hear an echo of that gentle lullaby the mother bear had sung to her cubs in the darkness. It was a song of love, of protection, of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. It was a song that would play in her heart forever. On her desk at the hospital, Kira kept a small framed photo from that night, the moment when she first knelt in the rain to help an injured cub while his mother watched with hopeful eyes. Colleagues often asked her why she chose that particular image when there were so many dramatic moments from that extraordinary evening. Her answer was always the same. "Because that's the moment I learned that love doesn't recognize species. Fear doesn't respect boundaries, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply reach out your hand to help, even when you're afraid." The bears were safe. The network was destroyed. The world was a little bit better. And in the forest sanctuary, a mother bear would sometimes stand at the edge of the meadow and look toward the distant city, remembering the human mother who had risked everything to save her family. Some stories end with victory. Some end with justice. This one ended with something more precious than either. It ended with a love that crossed the boundaries between species and reminded everyone involved that compassion is the most powerful force in the universe. When mothers unite to protect their children, mountains move, traffickers fall, and miracles happen in the rain outside emergency rooms. The mother bear had stopped traffic that night seeking help for her baby. She had found so much more. She had found hope